Welcome to the Daily Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Hello, my name is Mark Roberts. I'm your host tonight, and I am joined by Daniel Green. Do you go by Danny or Daniel? We should have maybe cleared this up before we start.
I hate Danny. I go by Daniel.
Okay, Daniel. And not Dan, just Daniel.
Actually, Dan's fine too. Just
okay.
Anything but Danny.
But Danny.
There you go.
All right, very good. I'm going to introduce I'm going to introduce Daniel in just a second. Before I do, just wanted to remind you, if you could, to please rate and review the podcast on iTunes or Stitcher or wherever you listen to it at. And also hit subscribe if you're listening. That helps keep us high in the rankings and helps us with things like sponsorships. So that's very, very awesome of you if you can do it. Helps us out on our end as well. All right, Daniel Green. This has kind of been in the works for a long time. We appreciate you coming on the podcast and talking to us. Daniel, as far as I know, is as far as the people I interact with, is one of the, I guess I would say, experts daily. Is that fair? Daily fantasy sports? I
mean, let's just say spends a lot of time doing fantasy sport, daily fantasy sports. Expert is too kind, but some may call me that. Some may.
Yeah. So you've dedicated a large portion of your life, maybe more than you should, to daily fantasy sports.
Yeah,
that's fair to say.
Yeah, it's crazy because I just a couple years ago started playing, and then all of a sudden, I'd say about last year, it kind of became a second job to me, where I was putting in literally grinding away 8 to 9 hours a day on DFS, and one day I kind of just woke up and I was like, wow, I can't believe how much time I'm putting into this. I just kind of got I can say obsessed or just really into it. It was just a lot of fun, and especially for me, I do all sports, but basketball is my main passion, and it's always been that way. So DFS for and I used to always play season long, but the daily games were just awesome for me. And the best part about NBA is with like League Pass, actually watching the games, it just it kind of took on a life of its own, Mark. So I'm just glad to be here, man.
Yeah. Thanks for coming on. So so we're gonna do a very daily games centric podcast. If you're here for the season long stuff, don't tune out. Stick around and listen. But we are gonna spend most of our time talking about specifically daily games, how to approach them. What are some good ways to try to make sure you're protecting your money and investing it well. Before we get to that, though, Daniel, what can you share with us a little bit so we can get to know you a little better? What is your either favorite or least favorite NBA team or player?
Oh, so it's interesting. So I'm actually from Wisconsin. So I still root for the Milwaukee Bucks, but Dwayne Wade went to Marquette, and I grew up living about 5 to 10 minutes away from Marquette, and my dad went to Marquette Law School, so I was always a big Marquette fan. And when D Wade was there, I would watch him in college all the time. And he, in college, he just dominated. He took Marquette to the Final Four one year. So basically, when he got drafted by Miami, I immediately became a huge Miami Heat fan. And this was before they got LeBron, so I wasn't like a bandwagon Heat fan. But so I basically am a huge I'm a live and die Miami Heat fan. But it's more so just like a Dwayne Wade fan. Like once he leaves them, the Heat, like I don't really think I'll root for the Heat. So it's kind of like I just go where D Wade goes. Which has been painful the last couple of years as the cartilage in his knees kind of goes away. It's kind of frightening because I'm starting to envision the time when he will no longer be on the Heat or be able to walk for that matter. But yeah,
it's been a good run though. I mean, if you're going to follow a player from college through his pro career, that's a good run.
Yeah, I mean it's unbelievable. I mean, going back to 2006 when he led them to the title with Shaq. I mean, it was just that was one of maybe the best finals performances ever. So yeah, it's been a great ride. So can't complain too much there.
All right, thanks for sharing. I think what we want to do next here is and mostly you have done some research for all the games that are going to happen on Tuesday night. This is Tuesday's podcast. You've looked at the prices. You've looked at a bunch of other elements, which is actually what I want to ask you about a little bit as well. So we're going to talk about not only some players and their salaries, but also how you approach, decide, what factors you take into account as you're looking at games and how you can make sure you're making a good decision, or what are, just everything that factors into your choices as you price out who you're going to play in a given night. So should we start with the Celtics-Bucks game?
Sure.
And you kind of walk us through what you're paying attention to there.
Sure. So kind of the first thing that I'll do with any game is kind of look at the Vegas over-unders. And luckily, so for tomorrow, there's a 7-game slate tomorrow. All the over-unders are not out yet, but this one actually is. So you can see Milwaukee's a 1-point favorite, which is a good sign for DFS, and it's about 202 over-under, which is a pretty good over-under. If there's, and really in DFS terms, if there's a game about 205 and above, that's a game that I want to target. And anything under 200 is something that I want to avoid for the most part. So 202 is kind of in the middle. It's something that doesn't, stand out to me, but it's not horrible.
So would you just explain that? Why do you care what the over-under is?
Well, so again, we're in terms of DFS, right? We're talking about, obviously if the more points there are just in general, and as you can see, I have a dog, so my dog is barking like going crazy.
He's really excited about the Celtics game.
I mean, maybe. Well, I know you guys in the podcast love Giannis, right? Maybe he's excited about talking about Giannis.
Yeah.
But yeah, so again, like just the higher, the more points there are, the faster the pace, just the more fantasy points there's going to be, right? The more DFS points there's going to be in general, right? And that's essentially what we want to target. So not only a high over under, but also a close game. If there's a game with a spread typically above 10, that's also a game that I want to avoid, especially in cash games. So kind of those are the kind of the two main things that immediately that I look for when I'm the first thing I do when I wake up, I go to the Vegas page, I look at over unders and the spreads. Always the first thing I do.
Okay.
So the second thing that I'll do is then I look at injuries. And you can see for the Boston-Milwaukee game, there is an injury that might be important tomorrow, and that's MCW. Looks like he's still going to be out tomorrow. And then you want to look at what are the ramifications of that, of any injuries on a given day. And also Marcus Smart. I'm not sure about that one either. I'm not sure if he's playing or not. He wasn't listed on the injury report. So at least Vegas thinks he's playing, but I
don't think he traveled. I don't think he traveled to Milwaukee. I don't think he's playing.
Okay, that's weird because he now wasn't listed on the report. So all right, so that's obviously news also that's very relevant. So immediately that makes guys like for Boston, like Isaiah Thomas, right? That makes him become a very intriguing play and a guy that I want to target. With MCW out, that's a little trickier with the way Jason Kidd does his rotations. We've seen him the last couple games start two different people with MCW being out. We saw him start Ennis one game, and then we saw him start Bayless in one game. What was actually ironic is that the game that Bayless didn't start is, of course, the one that he exploded for 41 FanDuel points, and I didn't have him on any of my teams. But so kind of that's the second thing I always want to target is if there's injuries, which players are going to benefit due to those injuries. So for the Boston-Milwaukee game, there's a couple guys, and again, the first ones are Isaiah Thomas for Boston sticks out to me. And then for Milwaukee, it's probably going to be Bayless as a guy that I'm going to target as a value play tomorrow.
All right. And do you use like projections of some kind to help you sort of guess at how many draft or FanDuel points they are going to get? Or are you more looking subjectively like this guy's a really good price, and so I just want to get him in my lineup?
I mean, I do use projections, but I mean, like the problem is and this is one of the issues, and you can kind of see it. Oh, and we mentioned I actually have a website. It's called DG Courtroom.
Yeah, you forgot to plug your website. Tell us about your website.
So my website, by the way, is dgcourtroomdfs.com, and my website does not have projections, but like one of them, if you go ahead and look at my website, it kind of makes fun of all the websites who kind of deal with have all the projections and all the stuff like that. Which I believe that I think that projections are important, but there's just right now there's just too many websites with too many projections. So if you can find a website that has projections that you're comfortable with, I think it's fine. Like there's obviously sites like Roto Grinders is a big one that most people use. So I like to use them. But it's almost more I use them as a tiebreaker, for me. So if I'm torn between two different guys, then I'll maybe go to my projections and I'll see who's projected to have more points. So it's something that I do use. I just don't rely on it, as an end-all be-all like some people do.
Mm-hmm. So how can you tell? Because I think this would be relevant to people who spend less than 8 or 9 hours a day trying to set their lineup.
Right.
How can you tell if somebody's a good price or not a good price if you're not using a projection of how many points they're going to have?
So, all right. So if you're not using projections, there's a couple ways you can do it. And probably the easiest way to do it, right? I mean, and when you're talking value, it typically means, and each site is kind of different. But on FanDuel, it kind of means for a GPP, you want a player to hit 5 times his value or 5 times his salary, and in a cash game, you want him to hit about 4.5 times his salary. So, I mean, one of the easiest ways is just go to the game logs, right? So look at how a player's done his last 5 games. So if a player's priced is $5K, see if he's hit how many times he's hit 25 FanDuel points or fantasy points. That's a real quick kind of way to glance at it. And there are also tools on some sites that basically that will basically let you know how many times a certain player has hit quote unquote value. So hopefully that made some sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. All right. Yeah, thanks for giving us some of the intuition here. Should we go through a couple of these other games, and you can talk about some of the other players specifically you like for Tuesday night's games?
Yeah, man.
Which game do you want to talk about next?
Why don't we start the OKC Washington game with another possible injury.
Okay.
So, all right. So this is a game. OKC's at Washington tomorrow. The over/under is not released yet, but my dog wants a certain toy. It looks like. So the over/under is not released yet, but we see the spread. OKC is a 4-point favorite, which is great. And typically, as I'm sure all of us know, like OKC plays at a really fast pace. And Washington's been interesting this year as they're trying to up the pace too. So this is a game that I want to target a lot of different guys. And one of the most interesting things is now Bradley Beal. He banged up his shoulder the other day, and given Beal's injury history, it would make sense for Washington to be a little cautious here and not play Beal tomorrow. And obviously that would impact things. But but I think he's still questionable, so we're not sure. If he doesn't go, that could now. The problem with Washington, they don't really have a legit backup two. It looks like right now it's Gary Neal. He's priced at the minimum at 3.5K. Now most of us probably know Gary Neal from his San Antonio days, right? We're basically he could go fourth quarters and basically carry the Spurs. So he becomes an intriguing play. He hasn't looked that great this year. If you look at his minutes, he's only got basically played between 15 and 22 minutes the first 6 games of the season. He's given you between 1 FanDuel point and 18.4 FanDuel points. And he's really dependent on scoring, which is one thing normally I'll try to avoid. But when someone's priced the minimum, and if Beal does sit, Gary Neal, especially at shooting guard, which is a thin position, that's a guy that I will be looking to target tomorrow in both tournaments and cash games. Because again, this pace is going to be up and down.
So I want to ask you about that. Why would you recommend not targeting guys that just do one stat, or specifically, why would you not target guys who just do points?
Well, so again, let's say I do target Gary Neal, right? And he has an off night, and he puts up, let's say he shoots 1 for 10, but he's Gary Neal, right? So he's going to probably get you 0 rebound, or maybe 1 rebound, maybe an assist, although he probably hasn't passed in the last 6 years, and probably a turnover. So if he goes 1 for 10, he's going to destroy my lineup, right? So it's guys like that I wouldn't play in cash games, but maybe I would just target, in a tournament. But given the fact that Beal may be out, tomorrow may be a special case where I may want to target Neal in a cash game. I'm not exactly sure if I want to do that yet because we haven't heard the news on Beal. But for the most part, it's kind of the same like our season-long games, right? I really want to target guys who fill up a stat sheet and don't need to score. Like Paul Millsap's a really good example of that. The guy from Portland, what's his name?
Amino?
Yeah, Amino was a great example of that, right? His usage rate is really low, but he fills up the stat sheet. Guys like that are really good at target because they're not scoring dependent. I don't have to worry about Amino going 1 for 10 at any given night. I know that he's going to give me rebounds, going to give me assists, going to get those good steals, probably get a block or 2 as well. I don't mind targeting only scoring dependent players, but if I do, it's mostly going to be for tournaments.
Yeah, it makes sense. All right. Is there anything else you want to talk about with OKC Washington, or should we go to the next game here?
Yeah, I guess I would just say what's been interesting about Washington is that if you look at and one of the things that I'll look at for research is defensive versus position. So now we've had about 2 weeks of the season just about done, right? So now is the time when I'll first actually start to look at this year's stats. Before really 2 weeks are up, I don't want to look at stats because I think it doesn't really make a lot of sense. Like even now, if you look at some of New Orleans stats, it looks like they basically allow the most points to opposing point guards, but that's because they played Golden State twice, right? So Steph Curry lit them up 2 times, and they've only had I think 6 games. So still the stats can be a little misleading. But after 2 weeks, I will start to now go to the stats and look at it. One of the things that's interesting is that Washington, man, their defense, they allow the second most fantasy points to shooting guards. They allow the most fantasy points to small forwards and the 5th most to centers. So, I mean, obviously Kevin Durant's always an elite play. But due to the fact that Washington can't defend the small forward position, which is a little surprising because I thought Otto Porter would be a little bit better defensively. I got my eye now on Kevin Durant even more so than I normally would. So again, tomorrow's an interesting day because we got there's always the big some stars in play, right? Tomorrow we got Anthony Davis in play, Westbrook's in play, Durant's in play, LeBron's in play. When I see something like this where Washington allows the most points to small forwards, that makes me obviously I already like Durant, but now I might like him a little bit more. And if I need maybe there's a tiebreaker and I'm torn on do I use Durant or do I use Westbrook, this may make me that stat like that may make me lean towards Durant tomorrow.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Next game I want to talk about with you is Utah and Cleveland. And I guess I want to get your perspective on this because I remember last season, my advice was almost always just avoid Utah because one is they had such a strong defense down then towards the end of the season. And then 2 is they played at such a slow pace that almost seems like if you were going against Utah and Rudy Gobert, you just avoided them. And you just avoided them and look for somebody else on another game. So I'm curious, is that trend kind of continued this season, or has Utah loosened up on allowing fantasy points a little bit better this season?
No, man. They've basically picked up right where they left off, and I avoid Utah like the plague, man. For the most part, especially in cash games, I don't want any part of them, especially taking front court players against Utah. And you look at the stats, right? They've allowed the fewest points to point guards, the 5th fewest points to shooting guards, the 2nd fewest fantasy points to power forwards, and the fewest points to centers. So again, I see Utah, and I almost just cross that game out. I want no part of it, and I move on to the next one. And what makes Utah even worse this year, speaking of the Jazz players, is guys like Gordon Hayward. His numbers across the board have been horrendous. And what's interesting about him and just watching him play, his peripheral stats have also been way down. So it's not like we can say, his shooting has been down, but that's going to pick up. So I'm not really sure what's going on there. The only player that's really looked great, or I'd say consistent offensively for Utah in terms of DFS has been Derek Favors. And then he came down with the flu. So the last 2 games has been awful. So Utah has been a very tough team. And I've avoided them offensively for the most part. And then, teams that, that they're playing against, I've avoided as well.
But I will ask you about that with Gordon Hayward, because I think, in a season-long league, my recommendation would be Gordon Hayward's going to figure it out. He's not a different player. He's the same guy. So eventually he's going to start producing as you expected. So I would probably call him a buy low. I would tell people to target him in trades and that sort of a thing. First of all, you might not agree on Gordon Hayward, but just if we talk about
I totally do. I totally do, by the way.
So is there a way to take advantage of that in daily fantasy, or do you just kind of have to start waiting for him to have a good game?
No, that's the thing. And daily fantasy can be interesting on a number of different levels. And one of the ways is you can play cash games or GPPs, and it depending, and that's a whole debate on what you want to play and how much, and everyone thinks, tries to tell people, what they should play. Oh, you should only play, you should play 90% cash games or 80%. I think each person should make up their own mind how much they want to play each night, and also, what percentage is cash games and GPPs, and how risky they want to be. But so I like to play more GPPs though, more of these bigger tournaments, kind of, so you can win more prize money if you do well. And one of the things when you're playing, big GPPs, like I like to do, is you want to target players who have upside, whose ownership is going to be low. Gordon Hayward is a perfect example, right? And also, we've seen his price come down in the industry across the board on DFS. Right now, it's 6.6K. I mean, Gordon Hayward's, a guy who can give you, when he's playing well, he can give you 40, 45, even 50 FanDuel points. So this is the lowest I've seen his price, quite honestly, in the last year and a half. I'm trying to think if I've ever seen it lower, quite honestly. I don't remember a time when it's been lower than 6.6K. So, we all know he has the potential, right? We don't think he's injured. So he's going to turn it around at some point. So it's interesting. So right now with Gordon Hayward, what I'm doing is I'm playing him in one lineup every day. And I'm just hoping he turns it around. And, and the thing is, so I played him, I think was it yesterday or 2 days ago I played him, and he was 3% owned. So
and that was against Memphis. He actually had a nice game.
Yeah, and he did pretty well. He didn't crush, but he played pretty well against Memphis. But again, so if you can get a player that's like less than 5% owned and just goes off one night, or has the upside capabilities like Gordon Hayward, it can really separate yourself from the entire field. So it's guys like that who you do want to target in GPPs. And if you're playing a lot of lineups like I like to do, you definitely want to throw guys like that. Guys who are struggling, make sure you throw them in a lineup. Another guy like that is similar to Gordon Hayward, who I've been playing in, every day I'm playing in a lineup, is Klay Thompson. He hasn't, he's been in a shooting slump, some would say almost for a year now. But again, his price has come down to about 6.8K across the industry. And he's capable of we saw him score 30 points in a quarter last year. So and his ownership is down across the board too. So it's guys like that, guys who have upside that I definitely want to target in tournaments. Now it's a little too risky for cash games. And if you're only playing one or two lineups a day, I wouldn't recommend doing that. But if you're playing, several lineups, definitely don't be afraid to throw those guys in a lineup. Because when they do go off, and they're going to, they can make you a lot of money.
Okay, let's I want to get to the next game, but before we do, Daniel, I got a question for you.
Yep.
Have you ever, playing daily fantasy, have you ever looked at your lineup and thought to yourself, I would love to challenge one of my opponent's players, just one of his players, and not his entire team? Up until now, that's been impossible. But now, with nohalftime.com, you can. The nohalftime.com app allows you to create individual challenges using players or teams. For example, you can pit LeBron James versus Carmelo Anthony. You can pick Chris Paul versus John Wall, or any other number of. You could pick Gordon Hayward against who knows? Paul Millsap. You mentioned him earlier. Creating a challenge takes only seconds, and accepting challenges is even easier. No halftime challenges can be private or public, and they can be created for NFL, NBA, MLB, hockey, college football, college basketball, and other sports. So join today and get started. Real money and fantasy supremacy awaits you. What were you going to add there?
I was going to say, can we take someone like against Austin Rivers? Because then I'd feel pretty confident.
You sure can. I think you can pit any player against any other player. Nice. To get Austin Rivers, though, I'm guessing that you would have to sort of pit a comparably bad player against him. I'm not sure who that would be.
Like, he's so bad. I mean, who's comparable to Austin Rivers? I mean,
you might have to go like
at this point, is it like Jose Calderon? Is that like something?
Yeah. That would be kind of a fun one. We might have to offline. We might have to set that up or something.
That would be a good one. What would be another good one?
I've actually am intrigued by that facet of the No Halftime app of being able to pit terrible players against terrible players and just see who, like, even if you get in the game, that basically guarantees they win.
We could do like Richard Jefferson versus Meta World Peace. That would be a good one.
Exactly. Yeah. Now you're getting creative. So, if you're interested in this, go to nohalftime.com and you'll get some more information there. You can download the app on iTunes or Android. And when you do, you receive a bonus payment if you'll enter the promo code BBALL. So that's BBALL at sign up. And that's No Halftime, where the fantasy sports season never takes a break. So, I mentioned this last night, Daniel. One of the things that I kind of struggle with in daily games is finding like 8 players that I'm really happy with that fit into the salary cap. And I know that's part of the fun of it. Yeah. But sometimes I just want to say, like, because of what I know about fantasy, I know this guy's going to have a great game tomorrow. And I don't want to have the hassle of like finding 7 guys to fit in a salary structure on him. I I just want to put my money on that one guy.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's really cool about this new app is it allows you to do that. Like you were mentioning Gary Neal earlier. Like if you got a hunch that Gary Neal is going to be great, you can totally just go set up a challenge, Gary Neal versus Austin Rivers, maybe, and you can clean house. So
dude, I'm downloading that app as we speak. That's fantastic. Honestly,
sounds good. All right, we'll have to, like I said, we'll have to set up a challenge, you and I, and see whose terrible player comes out on top.
Dude, Ramon Sessions versus Austin Rivers, that'd be a good one too.
I don't think we're gonna be able to get Daniel back into the daily games here.
Yeah, you guys lost me now. This is my new favorite thing to do.
Awesome, man. All right, let's talk about a few of the games. We'll kind of go with some quick hitters here.
Yeah.
Lakers and Heat. What are you looking at there?
All right, so again, one of the first things I do, if I see any team right now versus the Lakers, you start salivating. You want to attack the Lakers. You want to attack them in cash games and in tournaments. They just play no defense right now. They're horrendous, almost guarding almost every position. The only thing that worries me a little bit is you can see right now Miami's a 12.5-point favorite. So the blowout, there's somewhat of a blowout concern here. The spread actually opened up I think around 9. It's already moved to 12.5. It shows you how no one has any faith in Kobe and his pathetic Lakers right now. I think the top.
So who are some guys that you're thinking about playing?
I mean, for me, my top center tomorrow on the board is Hassan Whiteside. The Lakers, allow the 6th fewest. Where's my notes here?
The guy that I'm thinking will be interesting because, like you mentioned, there's blowout potential, but I don't think that's going to affect Justice Winslow, and I'm sure he has a low salary.
In terms of value, guys, he's a great value out of great value out. He played he's getting almost over 30 minutes a game right now for Miami, and last game he played the most minutes out of any player on their entire team, which is pretty shocking. The only thing that concerns me about Winslow is that he doesn't really have an offensive game right now. So, he's getting a lot of hustle stats. If you watch him take a jumper, like when he shoots, I basically duck in my apartment because I'm scared that ball is going to come hit me.
It's true, but I wonder if maybe playing against the Lakers softy will allow him, like in a blowout game, if he's on the court, if it'll allow him to get some hustle points.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the good things. So I mean, yeah, and you're spot on with that analysis. I mean, if you're talking if a game could potentially be a blowout, it brings other people who would not normally be in play, and mostly bench players. So right, so Winslow, let's say, he's getting minutes with the starters anyway. But so my projections would probably have Winslow get an additional 3 to 4 minutes, in blowout time. And like you said, blowout time, in terms of like real basketball probably doesn't matter. But for like fantasy sports, season long and daily games, I mean that's where you can make a ton of money. So guys like Mario Chalmers, guys like Johnson, guys like Winslow tomorrow all become really good plays because they could get some extra run. Even guys like Bob McRoberts could get some extra run tomorrow. So there's a lot of guys to target, but Winslow by far is one of the top value plays tomorrow. He's still only 3.6K on a site like FanDuel. So again, he's a great play. But I think again the Lakers allow the most points to centers. So Whiteside is my top center on the board in cash games and GPPs. I mean, slow Roy Hibbert can't defend anyone anymore. And if he goes out of the game, who are they going to bring in? Brandon Bass. They can try to slide Randall to the 5. That probably won't work too well. So I love Whiteside. I don't mind guys like Wade. A guy who I'm also going to target a little bit in tournaments tomorrow is Goran Dragic, whose price has dropped all the way to 5.8. Now, remember how we were talking earlier about players who have upside who just haven't played well yet? I mean, Goran Dragic is another prime example. A lot of that is because he didn't play, really in the offseason because he had some allegedly he had some issues with his with his, I think it's his wife. His wife gave birth and they had some complications. So there's a lot of personal stuff going on with Dragic. He wasn't able to play basketball over in the offseason. So his price down to 5.8K. Again, he hasn't looked great. He's not in the best shape. But against a team like the Lakers, you don't have to be in shape. So he's the guy that I want to target and get some exposure to. I'm not going to go crazy playing him, but if there's one team he could take advantage of, it's definitely the Lakers right now. So again, when you see the Lakers, you definitely want to make sure you're targeting them. And tomorrow, that means Miami becomes a great play.
Okay. Let's talk about the Knicks and Raptors. Who are some guys that you're targeting there?
All right, so this is actually really an interesting game. One, because again, there's another thing that I look for in DFS, and we probably do it in season long too, right? Is when we want to try to find players, we want players who are going to get minutes, right? We want consistent minutes. We especially want to know rotations. Which teams have coaches who actually play consistent rotations? Unfortunately, Derek Fisher, like Brad Stevens, there's many others. Is kind of all over the place though. So he's still starting Jose Calderon and Sasha Vujacic, which is heartbreaking for me because the Knicks actually have some talent. They have the guy Grant at point, who's the backup point guard, and Langston Galloway, who I like a lot at shooting guard. I'm just praying for those guys to get some more minutes. Right now, they're basically getting a little under between like 23 and 30, depending on the game. So I still like those guys, but really they're only tournament plays for me tomorrow. I mean, and another frustrating thing is Porzingis, right? He's had some great games lately, but Derek Fisher refuses to play him 30 minutes. And if you're not getting 30 minutes a game, I really can't count on you for a cash game. But Porzingis is a guy who I'm definitely not going to be afraid to roll out in a tournament. The last couple games, he's been great. I mean, he's been hitting 5 times, 6 times value in under 30 minutes, which is pretty damn impressive. So for the Knicks, there's not a whole lot I like to target. Porzingis is one guy. Obviously, Melo you can, but Melo's really expensive. And the other 2 guys that I'd like to target are Langston Galloway and Grant a little bit. I'm hoping that one day Fisher will see the light and not play Calderon and Vujacic so many minutes.
All right, let's talk about Dallas and New Orleans. Who are some players you like there?
Man, that was a nice little segue going from New York to Dallas, because again, another coach who just doesn't have a set rotation makes me want to pull my hair out. We don't know what to do with Dallas, right? I mean, we have Chandler Parsons. Like, have you ever seen this before, Mark? I mean, Parsons is basically playing like one half of a game. Like, it's
I've never
crazy,
seen
right?
this before. It's really crazy. It really is. Like, it almost makes you feel like they're not, like they don't care that much about these games at the start of the season. I don't know if that means they're trying to get healthy so they can make a playoff push, or because they don't care about the season. But if you're playing a guy for only half of the game, like, I don't know. It just seems like you're more focused on his rehab than worrying about him helping your team win games.
Yeah, I mean, it's just super bizarre. Like, I mean, like by playing him only a half, like is he? I mean, either you're healthy to. I mean, for me, I think you're either healthy to play or you're not. So, it's just a very bizarre how they're doing that. On Twitter, I was joking around with someone like, why don't they play him like every other minute, which would be much more exciting to watch. Like, watch him. Comes in for a play and then goes out, comes back in. It's just like it's really bizarre. So, and in terms of like DFS, I mean, obviously Parsons is a guy we really can't play. But then they also, to make it worse, they have Wes Matthews, right, who's also on a minutes restriction. And I think he's going up to about 30 minutes per game now. But even him, he's a guy that I'm just starting to look at now. But at this point, until I see him hit that 30-minute mark, I'm not sure I want to target a guy like that. So for Dallas, and then you have like Dirk Nowitzki, who's he's basically, I think he invented the tombs or helped build the pyramids. So Dallas is a tough team to figure out. And then you have Darren Williams. So Dallas is basically, I'm staying away for Dallas for the most part. The one thing that I do like, I have been playing a lot in Dallas, is a guy who I didn't even know before this year, and that's what's his name? Last name is Powell, right? D. Powell.
Dwight Powell.
Dwight Powell. Whose price is he's 4.6K on FanDuel. He's playing between 23 and 26 minutes, which is pretty good, and giving you between 23 and 30 FanDuel points. So he's a guy, if you're looking at value plays, he's a guy that I have been targeting. I think he's an okay play for Dallas. But for the rest of Dallas, I don't want a lot of exposure there. But when you look at New Orleans, then we have obviously Anthony Davis, who's always a top play. What makes him even more appealing tomorrow is that Dallas allows the most fantasy points to opposing power forwards, which is really not surprising, right? Because Dirk Nowitzki can't really defend anyone. So, really for me, Anthony Davis and Durant are the 2 top plays on the board tomorrow, in terms of, any position.
Okay. Let's move to the last game, Charlotte and Minnesota. Who do you like in that game?
All right. So you're looking at, this is a game, Charlotte's a 2.5 point favorite right now, 199 over under. It's probably going to be kind of an ugly game. Minnesota, surprisingly, Sam Mitchell his rotation has also been a little wacky. Like, have you noticed that like Wiggins is not getting like the same run he got last year?
Oh, totally. I think that has a lot of Wiggins owners in a year-long leagues pretty concerned.
Right. So I mean, like the last game was the first one where Wiggins actually got legitimate like over 35 minutes, and he took 27 shots. But I mean, so his rotation is been weird, and he's starting Tayshaun Prince, he's starting Kevin Garnett. I'm not sure what's up with all these coaches just like feeling the need they have to start these older veterans who have been in the league like 20 years. It's pretty interesting, or you could say bizarre, or you could say cool, depending if you like those guys. But again, for DFS, for me, it's just taking minutes away from guys that I want to play. So it's tough for me in terms of a DFS player to kind of watch. But so for Minnesota, Wiggins is a guy I'll look at, but I don't want a ton of exposure there. Rubio, he came out of the season blazing hot, and now he's kind of settled back into the Rubio we all know. He can't hit a jumper, and he's going to give you maybe 10 assists, but not do much else. So he's a fine play, but he's not a great play anymore. The guy that I do like in Minnesota, one of the interesting things about Minnesota is you look at their defensive stats, they've been surprisingly like really playing really well defensively, which I don't think any of us thought, that would happen coming into this year. I'm trying to quickly pull up the Minnesota stats I was looking at. They allow the second fewest points to point guards, which is pretty shocking, right? Because none of us think of as Rubio as like, as a defensive stopper. They also allow the second fewest points to small forwards, and they allow the fifth fewest points to power forwards. And a lot of that is because Towns is actually, he's a pretty good defender. And the guy who's, I don't think any of us knew before this year, I certainly didn't, and I'm going to butcher the name, like Bjelica, which I know is not how you say it. But that guy, I think. Yeah, there you go. Yeah. His length is crazy. So those two guys are making it very hard on opposing teams. Which makes me not want to target a lot of guys in Charlotte tomorrow either. I'll look at Kemba Walker a little bit. Marvin Williams has been a super safe play. And Al Jefferson's, a guy that I'll look at maybe a tiny bit. But, not a lot of, fantasy goodness or DFS goodness in that Charlotte, Minnesota game.
All right. I think that's all of our games for tomorrow night. Daniel, is that true? Did I miss any?
No, I think we hit on them all. Went by fast.
Yeah, a lot of good. It seems like a lot of intriguing games tomorrow night. It'll be fun to see how that plays out.
Yeah, tomorrow's a nice 7-game slate. So if you can get typically between like a 6 and an 8 game slate, that's pretty good. Once you start getting into the 10, 12, 14 game slates, then you just have so many options. You just want to go crazy. So 7-game slate, that's a pretty manageable size.
And it seems like you're recommending if you're going to start one lineup, you start it with Davis and Durant.
Right now, those are my two top plays on the board. And obviously Westbrook's, if you want to throw Westbrook in the mix, obviously you got to do that as well. And basically, that's almost, you can do it almost any day, right? Westbrook, Westbrook, Durant, and Anthony Davis. Even though Anthony Davis has been struggling, start of the year, again, two of those games were against Golden State, so that's why some of his stats don't look as great. But he's slowly starting to turn around the last couple of games. Given the teams that they're against and the pace, the two guys that I want to target probably are going to be AD and Durant, and then third is going to be Westbrook for me.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing all that with us.
Top center, Whiteside, my man.
Whiteside. All right. There's a good start for your team tomorrow night. Hey, Daniel, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast and helping us with the daily game stuff. I think I'm like a lot of the listeners here. I like to play. I certainly don't spend the type of time that you spend looking at it. So appreciate you coming on and sharing some of your knowledge with the folks that listen to the podcast, and hopefully whoever's inclined can use it to make some money tomorrow night.
Absolutely. Anytime. Thanks for having me, man. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was good to get to talk to you a little bit more than we get to talk just on Twitter or whatever. Why don't you remind everybody where they can find you on Twitter and where your website is?
All right. So on Twitter, I am Daniel A. Green 1, and that's green like the color. So Daniel at Daniel A. Green 1. And then my website is dgcourtroomdfs.com. And
it's a pretty sweet website. I've checked it out. I would recommend going and check it out. You give daily fantasy advice on there, don't you?
Absolutely.
So you want some good information, you can go check out his website there. And of course, you know me, I'm Mark Roberts, and you can find me on Twitter at Mark F. Roberts. And we will be back with another show tomorrow night with another guest host. So you can look forward to that. And thanks again to the folks at nohalftime.com for sponsoring today's podcast. See you tomorrow, guys. Bye.